So what's really in these JFK files now that we finally have this massive release? I mean, most of the documents, to my knowledge, unredacted. I mean, thousands upon thousands of pages. Historians have been pouring through all of this. Someone who spent most of his life focused on this is Larry Hancock, a respected author, national security researcher, best known for his deep investigations in the assassination of President Kennedy. And I think what sets Larry Hancock apart is his commitment to looking at the documented evidence here, the meticulous use of the declassified intelligence and these documents. And Larry joins us now to kind of go through these files. Larry, welcome to the show. Good to see you.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's a challenging time for document geeks, which we kind of consider ourselves to be as like, okay, what did we look at last week and what's it look like this week?
Well, I got to ask you that. So you've been studying this story for decades, and then suddenly you're met with this massive trove of documents. Where do you start, and what sort of jumped out to you right away that maybe you didn't know and maybe our audience had no idea about?
One thing I think it's important to realize is that the JFK collection basically is constituted by everything that the FBI, the CIA, the agencies turned over during the initial Kennedy assassination investigation, plus all of the inquiries that followed it. The Church Committee, the Rockefeller Committee, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and most recently in the 90s, the work of the Assassinations Records Review Board. So it's a collection, everything gathered together on one spot at the National Archives, but parts of it have been there for decades. It's not a new collection by itself. And when I was first scanning through a few nights ago, we have a tool that actually lets us look and do a search and say, for this particular document, has it been released before? And by the way, how many times? And I was looking at documents that had been released 3, 4, 5 times before that I had written about. And the big challenge was, is anything unredacted now that we didn't see before? Which generally, I have to say, they had told us to a large extent what they had redacted were names of sources, names of operatives, sources themselves, identities, which, unless you're really into this and you already know a lot of these people and you know a lot of context, it's not going to be too meaningful. And the good news is if you do, then suddenly you can go, aha, I was waiting for that cryptonym or I was waiting for that identity for 30 years and now I can do something with it. But
did any of those jump out to you?
What we're seeing is a re-release.
Oh, most of it's a re-release. Were there any aha moments though? Like, oh my God, I've been waiting for this for 30 years?
Sure, there were a couple of documents, amazingly, that have been almost fully redacted. I think one, I would say it's important to realize that this is, what we're seeing now is probably as important to historians as it is to JFK researchers. For example, one document that had been almost entirely redacted was a memo from Arthur Schlesinger, a major advisor to President Kennedy, about restructuring the CIA. Kennedy was not happy with the CIA's military operations after the Bay of Pigs, over the missile crisis, just generally wondering if the CIA, if it was working like it should be working. He'd established a separate intelligence directorate to consolidate information from the services. He was satisfied with that, and it's like, do I need to take this further? Well, we knew the memo had been written, but we had not seen it. Now that we can see it, it really is an itemization of everything that the Kennedy administration understood was not going well with the CIA, what the CIA was doing contrary to State Department policies, and literally kind of disconnecting covert operations, even covert political action from administration policy. And it's a very negative report, which you can understand. The CIA probably would be, happy to have that redacted forever. So we're seeing that sort of thing. Very important for context, not a smoking gun for the assassination. What we are seeing on the assassination is some interesting things about Lee Harvey Oswald. For example, there have been a lot of claims that Oswald was an agent for the CIA, an asset for the CIA, When he went to Russia, he was working for the CIA. And one evening last week, I'm looking at the document saying, well, this is a CIA internal memorandum, and they're really not sure how Oswald got into Russia through Helsinki, and they have questions about that. They have questions about how he got back with a Russian wife. And you're kind of going, well, wait a minute. Clearly, if they have all these questions still, he's been and he's come back, it argues against that he was going over under their control task by the CIA.
Right. Right. That's a great point. I guess, we're sitting here thinking about, like, what is the smoking gun here? So is there a smoking gun in any of this? I saw someone in our chat just said, let me sum it up for you. Here's who killed JFK. They posted here. They put Israel, Mossad, and the CIA and the mob, case closed. Like, is it that case closed?
Oh, no, it's not case closed at all. Actually, what it is case open in a way, because what we know now, we've invested, some of us invested decades in looking at options and alternatives. And what we know by now, after all the work that's been done looking at this collection, is no legitimate investigation was ever made. Not by the Warren Commission, not initially. We know why it wasn't made. We know who gave the orders, how that happened. And we also know that especially the CIA and the FBI obstructed all the follow-on investigations. And if you were to talk to people from the House Select Committee or the ARB who are still living, will tell you now they know that too. So the good news is we've learned why we don't know what we should know if an investigation had been covered. Plus we have leads. And that's important. And I think Representative Luna is doing something very important, because we know the body that we've got. Now that we've unredacted, it helps understand how to get outside that box. The JF collection, as it sits now, is like a box. And if you stay in it, you're going to be trapped in it forever. But now we have the leads, and we know where the leads go to look for what should have been collected that wasn't, things that could be brought in, things that could be investigated. But if you just closed it off now and said it's done, then we're done. But the good news from all of this is we know where to look. We're providing information to her on where to look. And I think we've learned enough that something productive could be done. There's a lot of things that should have been brought into this that were not. And now we know what they are. So that's good news.
Can we start to rule things out, though? Because we know that the term conspiracy theory was born out of the government wanting us to not question their narrative, which tells us that their narrative of a single shooter, can we just now declare that to be BS? Can we do that?
Absolutely dead. We know that even the
so they need to reshoot all the movies.
Yeah, we can get that away.
Not single shooter. Not single shooter, and did Oswald fire a gun? Was Oswald one of 2, 3? Do we have a number that you're kicking around in your research now that it's 4, 5, 6 people there that day?
Here's where I have to draw a line. As a historian, try to do historical work. You can rule out there's not the evidence to prove Oswald in as the shooter. We see that in the documents that have been collected. We see that even the Justice Department advised the Warren Commission not to publish a position that Oswald was a shooter because they couldn't defend it. And they just ignored him and went ahead, and he was their advisor. What we're seeing now, it looks, the best definition I can give is 2 to 3 shooters, a paramilitary exercise by people that were trained, very well proficient in infiltration, exfiltration. These were people that knew what they were doing. This is not a shooter contracted by the mob. It's just somebody goes in and takes a shot and makes it. It's something that's organized and structured and comes out of a group, a clique, a working group that has been together probably at that point in time for 3-4 years in anti-Castro operations, trying to topple the Castro regime. And we actually, now that we've seen all the documents, have a good clue as to what triggered that. And these people were told that JFK was in November beginning back channel negotiations with Fidel Castro at his request, Castro's request, to go neutral, get the Russians out, reach an accommodation with the U.S. And unfortunately, when that word, as you can imagine, so critical to the parties that have been trying to kill Castro and overthrow the regime for 3-4 years now, it was explosive. So to answer your question, we can definitively, I'm comfortable with saying we can definitively say that Oswald didn't do it. Oswald was not directly involved. The evidence in hand shows if he had been tried in court, it's very unlikely with a good defense attorney he could have been convicted, considering all the problems we know about now. So we have to look towards an organized, structured, professional attack on the president for what you'd call strategic reasons, the personal reasons for some people, but strategic in regard to Kennedy's policies.
I am so frustrated.
I know.
I get that. I really appreciate that answer.
But we had some big advancements, I think.
Yeah. No, I definitely appreciate the answer, but then I want to ask you, well, then who killed Oswald? But I think maybe we should table that, right?
No, I'm going to not table it. I want to ask it because, what do these documents talk about Jack Rubenstein, a.k.a. Jack Ruby? How in the world was he there to shoot Oswald that day? Did we learn anything in the documents about Jacob Rubenstein?
No, we haven't learned anything in the new documents about him, but the shocking thing is we didn't need anything new. We know that the Warren Commission, even in the very beginning, had come across information about Ruby that was so critical that they refused to do what Ruby asked them to do. Ruby told Earl Warren in Dallas that if he would take him back to Washington, D.C., where he would be safe and protected, he would tell them about the conspiracy. Earl Warren refused to do so.
Right.
What we know is that Jack Ruby himself was connected to this clique of people. Ruby had been involved in Cuban activities since the Castro Revolution. He was connected to one of these team members, Johnny Roselli, who had been trying and working with CIA officers to kill Castro and overthrow regime for, again, 3-4 years. Jack Ruby can be connected into the plot. And strangely enough, and this is really sad, the only two unique Warren Commission-controlled investigators, other than the FBI, who they had to rely on, they could hire 2 people. They sent them to Dallas to investigate Jack Ruby, and they found connections that were so explosive that they were forced to resign. And when they did resign, they asked only one thing, and that was, when you guys interview them, we want to be in the room because we've got the tough questions that need to be asked. And they didn't call them back when they did the interview. So we don't really need anything new on Jack Ruby. We've kind of known where he's been coming from and what had to be avoided for decades now.
I have a question. I was reading Rob Schneider's book, and he talks about the JFK assassination, and he says that there were trees in the way that were removed after the assassination, and it pretended that they were never there, and those trees would have blocked the Lee Harvey Oswald viewpoint where they said he was. But I couldn't find any evidence about those trees. And so I figured you would know, because I went looking for that and I was like, what's this about the trees? Is that true?
There are 2 things that get convoluted on the trees, because there's 2 tree stories.
Okay. I want the tree stories.
One is if Lee Harvey Oswald was shooting at the president, the most obvious shot is to shoot straight out the window, looking down the street at the limo coming towards you. That would be straight. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some trees there and there might be some, but that's the good shot to take. That shot wasn't taken. The shots were not taken until the car turned the corner, slowed down, and started down the grade on Elm Street. Okay. So that kind of gets confused sometimes, but the other trees, I think there was a writer early on who started talking about trees that were over by the grassy knoll that were not there afterwards. and had been taken down, and that's not really true. That was kind of an urban rumor. So you got trees that you have to contend with in two places. At this point in time, the shots that were taken on Elm Street were in a very well-defined kill zone. If you were in the infantry and you were trained in how to do that's where you would do it, because you want to have multiple shooters. You can't risk, in all honesty, you can't risk not killing the president.
Speaking of the president, let's talk about LBJ. Larry, we know the dirty stuff that LBJ was involved with over the years. We've covered here on this show extensively the USS Liberty, the intentional killing of American sailors on the USS Liberty that Lyndon Johnson was fully aware of. So he's a dirty guy. Do these documents show him involved directly in any way with the assassination?
What they, and again, they do in a way. Okay, let's go back to the situation, because again, this is the collection that was assembled in essence to support the Warren Commission report of a lone gunman. So I don't think we were expecting to find that, but what they do show is a couple of things. They do show that, here's an example. When the Assassinations Records Review Board did its work in the 90s after the Stone movie and after all the interest in the assassination, the ARB called the autopsy doctor in, Admiral Berkeley. There are lots of issues with the autopsy. They asked him to show them the pictures of the entry wound that killed the president. Okay, that seems reasonable enough. Yeah. They gave him the official photos, the x-rays, and he said, well, I can't do it. And they said, what? And he said, there's nothing here I can't tell you that. And they said, well, this was a medical autopsy. You were in charge of it. You wrote the report, even though 3 copies of the report were destroyed. Okay, we won't go into that. That's a separate question. How can you not tell us that? And basically, he just shook his head at them and said, good luck with finding out. Now, that right there tells you there's a problem. What goes along with that is purely anecdotal. And that's the fact that we know now, well, this part's not anecdotal, that the autopsy directions on all the medical evidence were coming from the White House, from Lyndon Johnson. Berkeley even went so far to show the ARB personnel the ring that Lyndon Johnson had given him as a reward for his work. Wait a minute, how blatant do you have to get? More importantly, and I think to step back, it's kind of like your question about Jack Ruby. We have now known for years that the investigation of the assassination stopped in terms of conspiracy Friday night of the assassination with a series of telephone calls from Lyndon Johnson's office, which essentially told the police in Dallas, the Attorney General of Texas, that no charges would be filed that talked about a conspiracy. And if you had paperwork that talked about a conspiracy, tear it up. We know that actually Dallas had filed its initial charges of Lee Oswald was part of a conspiracy. That was torn up and disappeared. We know that after Johnson talked to Hoover that evening and the next morning, Hoover issued a directive to the entire FBI that said, like yesterday evening, we gave you a directive to do an open-ended investigation. All sources, all possibilities, all people that might have been behind it. The next morning, Saturday morning, after call with Johnson, Hoover's directive says this will be entirely focused on Lyndon Johnson. No more open-ended investigation. If it's not a lead involving Oswald, we don't want to see it. And Sunday afternoon, Hoover issued a directive that said the FBI would immediately produce a report showing that only Oswald had been involved, and essentially the investigation was done. And we all know that's impossible.
It's so clean. right?
Yeah, it's too clean.
It's so clean. It's so that just keep it clean, right? It's one person. We got him. He's dead. Move on. Let's move on as a country. It's like the Vegas shooter. It's one guy. Turns out it's not. Just move on. Don't ask any questions. Just move on. It's very convenient in that way. Larry, I mean, I could talk to you for hours about this, and I'd love to have you back on as we learn more and maybe more details are revealed about this. I guess people in the chat have been asking about Zapruder, and I'll ask you about that. And I've got a question about Argentina here in a second. But Zapruder, always like a shady character in all of this. Did we learn anything? Can you maybe paint a picture like why, him filming this, his involvement in this, and what do the documents now show in these files about Zapruder?
I don't know who Zapruder is, so can you ask that question?
Educate my lovely wife, if you wouldn't mind.
Mr. Zapruder actually had a firm in downtown Dallas. Actually, his building was in the right next to the Texas School Book Depository, the Daltex building, which is right down at the street. And he decided that the story is he decided that he wanted to go see the motorcade, which, okay, a lot of people did. He had a camera. He took his camera with him and gave us the closest film of the motorcade coming down the street, coming down Elm Street, which is a critical film if you're going to do trajectory analysis. And again, look into the possibility of a single shooter, multiple shooters. So it kind of became the benchmark. Okay. And in any criminal investigation, of course, it would have been seized immediately by law enforcement and taken into custody and very tightly controlled. Unfortunately, in this case, it was not. Life magazine bought it that evening, bought rights to it. And the story from that point in time, I would say bifurcates, but it's worse than that because you've got multiple copies going to multiple places, and you've got people describing things differently. The bottom line for the Zapruder thing, I think that people should appreciate is it was not released other than through Life magazine, who printed a series of shots supposedly showing the fatal bullet. And for some reason, the most important film, certainly in the history of the period, whoever did the layout supposedly got the sequence of frames wrong. So they don't show you what you see when you really look in the movie. When you look at the movie,
our chat is pointing out. Yeah,
intuitively, there's no doubt that JFK is shot from the front. There's just, his head snaps like this. You can have every physicist in the world in and come up with an explanation, which it's showing the Zapruder film real time would have been disastrous to the Warren Commission. So it was held back. And what you had was Life magazine controlling it. And what you had eventually, insanely enough, decades down the road, is the U.S. government paying the Zapruder family a horrible amount of money and still keeping it out of circulation. But if I could just elaborate on that one thing, there are several other films. And when I talked about Representative Luna and the work that her committee could do, there are several films that were held back by the media companies that acquired them, NBC being one of them. If we really want to resolve some outstanding questions that have come up, including the fact of a person that's been talked about a lot as Lee Oswald, shown in front of the school book depository at the time of the shooting, which needs to be put one way or the other. We need the originals of those films. And
that NBC has
organizations
that they've been sitting on.
They've been sitting.
That's right.
So we've
Absolutely.
are they on the internet anywhere? Have we ever seen them?
We've seen second and third generation copies. What we need is the original. That takes us into internet.
Our own media,
right? You don't want to go into internet photography.
Okay, that's.
Oh my God!
Surprising, but not surprising.
Larry, we'll get you out of here on this. And I don't know if you have any knowledge of this at all. But yesterday we reported here what Javier Milei, the head of Argentina, of course, is now sort of following a lot of moves on transparency there to release these Nazi documents in Argentina. all of the Nazis that moved to Argentina had set up a base of operations there during World War II. It was almost like another version of Germany in a lot of ways. The Third Reich had set up a major base of operations in Misiones and Bariloche and multiple locations in Argentina. It's widely reported that Hitler survived, did not shoot himself. I don't think anyone really believes that. I certainly don't. And the evidence supports that he went to Argentina and lived out his days into the 1960s. So these documents that Argentina is about to release, what are you hoping you'll see? Is there anything there that stands out to you that you're looking at as a historian?
Yeah, and interestingly enough, that's having been involved with way too many subjects over the decades, I suppose. Yeah, very familiar with the so-called rat lines that took Nazis of all types, a lot of SS, but also a lot of scientists into Argentina. And I mean, amazingly, you find things like Argentina starting its own fusion nuclear program with Nazi scientists that had been working on atomic research in Germany. But the other thing you find is that the CIA had convinced themselves that a great number of these former Nazis from the intelligence community, from the SS, not just the scientists. We tend to think that they just brought the rocket scientist over, but they didn't. They brought a lot of intelligence people, but they didn't bring them directly from Europe. They kind of enabled them getting to Argentina, and then they recruited them from Argentina into the U.S. And if you really want the full story of what evolved with the intelligence network and to some extent why the intelligence network became so obsessed with communist operating, immediately prior to the end of the war, a lot of that influence came from these Nazis who, of course, had been fighting communism as much as anything else. And
right.
They had a major influence inside the American intelligence community. It would be great to see exactly how those ties evolved. We know they're there, but again, the devil is always in the details. Who and when. Timing is especially critical.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would like more information about Operation Paperclip and how many of the Nazis held real positions of power inside the United States. Americans might be shocked to learn that. I hope we learn some of that in these documents. Larry, great to see you. The book is called The Oswald Puzzle. I know you're knee-deep in documents right now going through all of this. I hope you'll come back on the show with more revelations that we can talk about here on Redacted. Thank you so much, Larry.
Would love to. Thanks for having me.